My name's Vivian Slattery, and I have my own company, Monetary Solutions. We're independent financial advisors, and in our sector, it's very much like the room today. It's, very much male-dominated. Female financial advisors, it's very difficult to know the actual percentage, but it's believed that only 5% of financial advisors are actually female. Don't get me wrong, because interestingly, the majority of my admin staff are male. So, it's not just an all-female company. But what I'd like to cover today is, to look at female roles are changing. Like Mark's actually already said, the business world's changing. The percentage of breadwinners is changing as well. And I think, importantly, if this is all changing, we have to look at, men and women do process informationally differently. At least I believe it, and there's articles, who've said it as well. And then I would go into, I think for investors, when you're thinking about investing, or even if you have invested money, it's very interesting to look at other people's methods. Hopefully, I'll share with you our method. I'm not going to say it's right or wrong, but it's what we actually do. Our processes. I very much believe in a diverse portfolio, and then I'll conclude. Oops, let's go the right way. And again, I'm not the first person to say it today, but obviously one of the big things this year is Theresa May was appointed as Prime Minister. She's only the second female Prime Minister ever. And that's since, Prime Ministers, were elected or started being elected in the 18th century. But then again, it's not really surprising because females only have had the right to vote since 1918. And that wasn't for all females, it was only for females over the age of 30 to start off with. So, but it's not just in politics are things changing, as Mark's already said as well. It's obviously in the business world as well. And going back, the government actually reviewed the females in the business sector in 2010. And it was actually, found that on boards of FTSE 100 companies, only 12.5% had females included. And okay, this had increased, but it's still a very poor showing. And, again, it was looked at that, women have been achieving the highest qualifications and leadership positions in many walks of life. And he, questioned whether board members were being appointed on skill, experience and performance. And, recent figures are still showing that females are being paid less than men in 90% of sectors. And again, as Mark's already said, that it's not just in the business world, it's in the family world as well. This is changing. And again, women, are, the women as breadwinners is increasing as well. But again, as I said, I think it's important to look at, when the, everything or the female's role is changing, is, to actually look at, what the differences are. Because I think, men and women do look at things differently. We do process informationally differently. I'm not going to say, either the way men or women process information is better or worse. It's just different. And again, if our roles are changing, as Mark said, institutions have to look at this in their plans as well. Sorry, I've gone. And it's, again, our investment decisions, how we make investment decisions, a lot of men are motivated by euphoria-driven behaviour, whereas men, females tend to, buy holdings and keep hold of them over the long term. Men tend to, look at benchmarks and, that they're interested in trying to outperform benchmarks, and that's how they measure their success, where women are more driven by goals and objectives. And again, there's articles to show that, it's not just the way we process things, but our actual makeup is different. We're wired differently. So, I, think that, when we look at investment decisions, the more we understand about how we want to make our decisions or how our decisions are based upon, the better our plan is. And, it's, whether we're male or female, it's very important, to understand that. So how do we base our method? Well, we try to take our emotions out of our fund selection. I totally believe nobody knows what's going to be the best fund or the best thing to invest in. I always go back to, if you're in a room of investors or experts or whatever, who would have actually believed the interest rates would have gone down to 0.5% and even lower now? No one, I think, actually saw that coming. And that's not the only thing. Generally speaking, if people think that something's the right thing to invest, it's because it's already started to go up. So, we base our decisions, and again, I think if you go back to 15, 20 years ago, you never heard the word risk. How much risk is somebody wanting to take? But nowadays, most or a lot of experts, that's how they base the decision on, the advice they give clients. It's all about risk. And I always think the best way to explain that is it's not how you cope with the good times, those are easy, it's how you cope with the bad times. And if you want to measure how much risk you want to take on an investment, take yourself back to 2008, when the stock market just went down. And that day, would you be happy with a 40% loss? And if the answer is yes, then, or if you're willing to take that risk, you know where your risk is. If you're not, you're a more cautious person. And that's how you should, build your portfolio. And, again, today, if you put a portfolio together, backtrack it, so that you actually know what will happen in any situation, or not in any situation, but in some situations. I always think, when you're looking at investments, it's important to have a set process. And again, when times are bad, don't move away from it. Have it written down so you know exactly what you're going to do or what process you want to take. And, as I say, it goes back to the first thing, take emotions out of it. We have a very set process of how we build our portfolios. And again, it goes back to, I totally believe no one knows which one's the best one and which one's the worst one. But by sticking to a set process, it just, takes, or it's a very logical approach. We believe in a diverse portfolio. Again, I think in 2008, if you looked at it, I think practically everything went down. I don't think there was any safe investment. But generally speaking, if you have a handful of different asset classes, some are going to perform where others aren't. Generally speaking, hopefully something will go up when something else goes down. But it's, at least you're sort of covered, or you're more covered than anything else. Our investment process, again, I can't, go back. I heard many people, again, I can remember sitting next to somebody very soon after what happened in 2008. And it was another IFA. And she said to me, she goes, there's no way I'm going to recommend anybody invest in the market at this present moment in time. And I probably won't do for the next year. Literally, it's like when everybody else doesn't want to invest, normally that's the best time to invest because the market's down. And, if you have an investment process, when you come to times like that, you can refer back to it, read it, and actually work out what your investment process is. And this is basically our investment process. We start off, and the only reason I'm going through this is so, to give you an idea of how to build one up. We start off with literally a meeting where we can meet you and understand you. As I said, the more we understand about a person's position, or the more they understand about themselves, I think the better plan you can put together. Then we, literally put find out what the risk situation is. Go through and work out exactly, as I say, if you take it back to, the bad times, in other words, if you look in, 2008, what risks would you be happy with if something went wrong? Then we put, we already have portfolios that we've put together with different asset classes. And then, the implementation. But the other thing is reviewing. And I really do feel this is where a lot of investors, because they have no plans, they don't actually review their investments. We see people who have, different investments, they've had it 10, 15 years, and if you actually say to them, what performance did you get last year or the year before on your investments, they have no idea. They have no idea of what charges they're paying. I mean, the investment world, technology and everything else that's come into play, the whole market's completely changed since, I've been in the field since, well, very similar to Mark, I started off in 87. And, the amount of technology that's available to us is totally different. But also all the funds that are available, all the choices that are available are completely different. And it means that, things should be reviewed. I'm not saying if you have got an investment that's 20 or 30 years old, it's a bad investment. But you should know exactly what it is and what's happening to it, what charges you're paying, and, exactly what's available now. So it's really to build up and to make sure that you understand exactly what's happening and exactly, how your investment's doing. And that's why, again, research has showed that, a lot of, women, when it comes to making investment decisions, actually like to have an advisor to call upon. But actually, seeking advice means that at least, if you have, regular advice, at least you know exactly what's happening to your plans. And again, I'm just using this as an example. It shows you some of the different asset classes that you can have within a portfolio. But, obviously, the more risk you want to take, the larger amount of equities you have. But it doesn't, have to be, obviously, there's asset classes like direct property. Everybody can actually make up, their own portfolios, and there's no right or wrong. But it's really to make sure that you understand, in certain markets, how that actually, will react. And as I said, the best way to do it is to actually backtrack it to, if you like, the one that's readily always comes to mind is 2008, because I'm sure we can all remember back to that. So, really, in concluding, females' roles are changing. If there's going to be, more breadwinners, if the business world's changing, it means the investment world will change as well alongside it. The business world, I think, looking into the future, that will change as well. There will be, women will play a greater role with, it's happening already. I think in the future, like we're seeing, the amount of female breadwinners is increasing and will still increase. And as I said, it's not, there's no better, it's just understanding that information is processed differently. I think everybody needs methods. And hopefully I've touched on what our investment process is. And again, I think it's important that we all, everybody has their own investment process. Again, I think this could be very different for every individual. But the question I think you should ask yourself is, do you have a method? And do you have a process? And it's like, do you know where you're trying to go, with your investments and what you're trying to achieve? And also, do you know what risk profile your investments have as well? And again, is your portfolio diverse? Have you actually taken it back and looked what's happened in, other situations? In other words, have you backtracked the investment, for example, and gone back to 2008 and what would actually happen to your portfolio? maybe, some people would prefer not to. And that's really, what I'd like to, conclude on. And again, that's what, our actual company. Sorry, I'm a bit early, so. Anyway, thank you very much.